Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. From the California channel at the state capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. Prop 6, the gas tax repeal, is among the most contentious on the November ballot. Before we hear the pro and con of the proposal, we want to first get a nonpartisan analysis of Prop 6. We're joined by Paul Golaszewski, who's an expert in transportation from the Nonpartisan Legislative Analyst Office. Welcome.
Thanks.
So first, can you briefly explain how transportation funding works in California? How much is spent on transportation? Where does the money come from?
Sure. Transportation funding in California totals about $35 billion annually. This pays for transportation infrastructure such as road and highways, as well as transit and rail services. A little more than half of the funding comes from local government sources, primarily sales taxes, transit passenger fares, and city and county general funds. About 1/3 comes from state sources, primarily taxes on gasoline and diesel, as well as certain vehicle taxes. And then the remaining $7 billion comes from the federal government, and they get their revenues primarily from taxes on gasoline and diesel.
Okay, so how are state taxes approved generally? How does that work?
So there's two ways that state taxes can be approved. First, the legislature can pass a bill containing a tax with a 2/3 vote. Supermajority, and then have it signed by the governor.
Okay.
The second way is the voters can pass a proposition at an election that contains a tax.
Okay. So how are state fuel and vehicle fees levied?
So the state has what are known as excise taxes on gasoline and diesel fuel.
We see those at the pump.
Yes, these are charged per gallon of fuel that you purchase. So for gasoline, it's currently 41.7 cents per gallon.
Okay.
And for diesel, it's 36 cents per gallon. There's also sales tax on gas and diesel, but the rates are a little bit different for a variety of historical factors for those. In terms of the vehicle taxes, there's two vehicle charges that are colloquially referred to as car taxes generally. The first is the vehicle license fee. That one's been around for many, many decades.
Yes, we all know we signed that check.
Yes, that one you pay when you register your car.
Right.
It's a little over 1/2% of the value of the car.
Okay.
The second one is new. It was created by Senate Bill 1, and it's called a Transportation Improvement Fee.
Okay.
That one can vary from $25 to $175, depending on the value of your vehicle.
Right.
But most people pay $25 or $50.
Okay. Fees or taxes? It seems like. I mean, it's the same thing. You're paying the government. There's also a amount in there for electric vehicles, electric cars.
Right. That fee has not taken effect yet.
Okay.
That will start a few years from now, and that would be $100 for electric vehicle owners.
Okay, so that's all kind of sets up the issue of why are they trying to get more money. The argument is that there's $54 billion in a backlog of highway and road maintenance in California. And when you add local roads into it, some of them, CSAC, the Organization for Counties, says that it could be up as high as $130 billion when you add local road issues and maintenance in that. So this money is going to be paid, it's about $5 billion, a little bit more, over 10 years for highway and road projects. How are those funds going to be allocated?
Yeah, so Senate Bill 1 increased the gas and diesel excise taxes, diesel sales taxes, and it created the Transportation Improvement Fee. It's estimated it'll raise about $53 billion over the 10 years.
A little short of the 54 that they say they need.
Right.
And not all that money is going to road maintenance.
No, about 2/3 is specifically for road and highway repairs and maintenance. The rest is for various programs, some of which are to alleviate congestion, improve trade corridors, some are transit programs. In terms of how the funds are allocated, there are specific formulas set forth in the legislation. They're a bit complicated, but I'd say generally the way to think about it is the gas and diesel excise tax money is generally paying for the road and highway maintenance and repairs. The diesel sales tax money is generally paying for transit.
Okay.
And then the new Transportation Improvement Fee pays for both.
Okay. How much is it going to cost the average driver in California?
So most drivers use gasoline, and when you look at how much gasoline is being consumed and how many drivers there are and how much the new tax is, it works out to about $70 per driver per year for the gas excise tax. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, the Transportation Improvement Fee most people are going to be paying either $25 or $50. On average, it's closer to $50. So altogether, about $120 per year. Now, it's going to vary for specific individuals depending on the fuel economy of their car. And that also doesn't include the effect of the diesel taxes.
And the question is, how much is it going to cost to fix your front end if you're going down bumpy roads? Anyway, thank you very much for that conversation. Up next, a view in support of Prop 6, Jon Coupal from the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. What are the arguments for supporting Prop 6 and repealing the gas tax? Our guest would know. He's Jon Coupal of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
It's always a pleasure to be here, Mark. Thank you.
So, why are you supporting Prop 6?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons. Number one, California is already overtaxed. But number two, I don't think anyone disputes the fact that California roads are in terrible shape, and we need to do something about it. The problem is that the gas tax that was passed last year without voter approval via SB1 was done so without any reforms over Caltrans, without any reforms over CEQA, without any labor reforms. So if we're going to have the nation's highest gas tax, shouldn't we also have some reforms that go with it?
You're close about the highest. We're number 2, my understanding is, after this tax, we're behind Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania or Connecticut, one of the two. I think you're right, though.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
So
yes.
anyway, we're close.
For
a second.
Let's debate that point.
Right.
Do you want to be number 1 or number 2?
Well, there is. I mean, listen, there's a $54 billion maintenance backlog, and everybody knows the roads are in pretty bad shape. If we don't fix it, it's just going to get bigger. So if Prop 6 passes and the gas tax is repealed, where's the money going to come from to address that maintenance backlog?
Well, number one, I think one of the things that Assemblyman Vince Fong introduced last year, which couldn't even get a hearing, is a comprehensive plan on how to address our backlog and transportation needs. And the Republicans in the California legislature came up with a plan of $12 billion almost immediately without tax increases. And they did that by moving some funds around, also by using some of the general fund. Remember, Governor Brown's father, Pat Brown, dedicated a significant portion of the general fund to infrastructure. The general fund has been increased $36 billion in 6 years, and how much of that money has gone to transportation? Zero. So I think this is part of the mix.
Well, there's a $138 billion general fund. It's large, but the Sacramento Bee did an analysis of the Republican proposal, and they're saying, well, maybe not so much. So they're talking about a lockbox where they're going to set aside $1.3 billion there. They're talking about a car sales tax, $6.5 billion there. They're talking about administrative and regulatory reforms. They said billions. I'm not sure some kind of savings there, but they looked at each of these and they said, well, the bottom line is money's got to come from somewhere, so someone's budget is going to have to get cut. The concern on the other side, I think, is that if you do go to the general fund, well, then something else is going to get cut in the general fund, or if you go then to local agencies, same thing. There are going to be budget cuts. That a concern to you?
Well, first of all, the Republican plan had a significant portion of money going to the local. So, and by the way, we do believe that the local governments should be well funded and should be the point people on a lot of these transportation issues.
It's kind of a local control
issue. It is a local control issue, and we 100% agree with that. But remember, the LAO said that Caltrans was overstaffed by 3,500 engineers, costing $500 million. That's the kind of thing that we look at and say, if we're going to have that kind of waste, and if we're going to have the international joke known as high-speed rail, that is transportation spending.
That's a whole nother.
That is not different, because you cannot argue that high-speed rail is not a transportation.
No, but it's one thing I want to go back. You are right. The LAO did give a report saying that Caltrans could potentially be overspending by $500 million on staff, but they came back on a more recent report, kind of pulling back on that analysis and saying, well, maybe not so much. The reality is, too, $500 million is a lot of money in anybody's view.
Sure.
But we're looking at a $54 billion maintenance shortfall. So the $500 million is not going to, it's 2% or whatever.
Yeah, but billions are being generated. Billions are being generated by the existing gas tax. Remember, if Proposition 6 passes, California will be, oh my gosh, in that horrible position of having the 5th highest gas tax in the nation. Explain to me and the taxpayers of the state of California, where we already have the highest income tax rate, highest state sales tax rate, why it is that we cannot even put asphalt on the roads by having the 5th highest gas tax in America. That doesn't make any sense.
President Trump's talking about an infrastructure plan. He's floated a proposal of a 25-cent increase in the federal gas tax. Right. If it's good for the feds, why isn't it good for California to have a 12-cent?
Well, as you said, he floated the idea. how far did it get? He got a lot of blowback on that, again, because I think Americans view themselves as overtaxed, and Californians particularly so. Again, we're in a situation where the middle class is being squeezed, and we're seeing 1.2 million people move out of the state in terms of net domestic outmigration in the last 8 years. And that's a lot of that's middle class people. If you can't afford to stay here, then transportation issues almost become secondary.
Yeah, California is no question, it's a high cost state. Let me ask you one quick question. We only got about 30 seconds. So,
sure.
Part of this, of Trump's plan was federal dollars, but in order to get federal dollars to the states, typically you have to get a match.
Right.
Are we kind of being penny wise and pound foolish by not having the money to make the match to get the federal funds?
Well, I think we do provide the funds, and one of the things we could do is we could move the truck weight fees that are currently being diverted to the general fund to pay off bonds, move those back to direct transportation. Right. And we could also apply the sales tax on automobiles to transportation. That makes sense.
It's a complicated issue, and that's why we had you here. Thank you very much for joining us. Up next, a business leader who supports the new gas tax and opposes Prop 6, Allan Zaremberg with the California Chamber of Commerce. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. Well, a major business organization has taken the unusual step of supporting a tax increase. Why? We're going to ask our guest. Allan Zaremberg is the president and CAO of the California Chamber of Commerce. So, welcome to the Maddy Report.
Well, thank you for having me. It's good to be here and talk to your listeners and viewers. So,
thanks. So, Chamber of Commerce is coming out opposing Prop 6. Why?
you know, we absolutely need to maintain our highway infrastructure. There's no question that it's crucial to our economy to make sure that we can move goods in California, we can get people to work, we can move the goods from our ports to the rest of the country. But it's also a safety issue. Infrastructure needs to be maintained. Absolutely, we need to invest in our infrastructure. So I think one of the things that's really important is this is a user fee. It measures how much you use our roads and how much you rely on those. And so you pay an equal amount to how much you use. And the last time the gas tax was raised, even though it's a gas tax, but it's really a user fee, was when George Deukmejian, Republican, was governor and saw the need that we have to maintain our infrastructure, and that was 25 years ago.
Yeah, I was interested you said that because user fees are kind of a Republican concept.
Yes.
So that's kind of interesting. But you know, not all business groups are opposing Prop 6. There's some that are supporting it, like the California Farm Bureau. Why do you think they came to a different conclusion?
Well, you know, they use some fuel, obviously, for their farms to run their, if they have agricultural production, you know, whether or not it be their tractors or whether or not it be to run their wells for their water delivery. So they have, you know, they may have diesel. So they have a special peculiar interest there that's probably a business deduction out of their farms. But, you know, so they don't want to pay anything more at all. But for, you know, much of the people who are users who use the highways and not the farms, you know, for their travel, they need to make sure that the roads are safe, not only safe, but usable, and get rid of our traffic congestion.
Well, let me ask you this. Data indicates that gas in California is about 80 cents more per gallon than the national average. What do you say to those who say that this extra 12 cents a gallon is just going to increase that gap?
Well,
it's going to hurt the economy.
Well, let's put it this way. You have to pay for our infrastructure. It doesn't come for free. And the last time the user fee, the gas tax, was raised was 25 years ago. And so today,
you think about
a dollar, well, a
ago,
dollar only buys half as much concrete as it did 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. So let me put it in perspective, because George Deukmejian, you know, was governor during the Loma Prieta earthquake. He saw that our bridges need to be seismically retrofitted. He saw the need to maintain our infrastructure and invest in that. That was a Republican governor. We have a different governor, but still the same governor, Jerry Brown, recognizes we need to invest in our infrastructure today and in the future, or else we're all going to suffer both from safety perspective, but also from an economic perspective. We need to get our goods to where their destination.
Yeah, there's an ROI on that's kind of interesting. It's going to raise about $54 billion in fees, but the return on investment is $144 billion, according to some studies, of additional economic output. So a pretty good, a 2-to-1 return on investment, it appears to be. Let me ask you this. The proponents of Prop 6 are going to argue, listen, a new gas tax isn't needed. that the $5 billion a year this is going to generate can be found elsewhere. We can cut the state budget. We can look at other ways to spend money specifically on capital projects, on roads, regulatory reform. What are your thoughts? Is the shortfall on road maintenance because we're just not spending our dollars wisely, or there's fraud, waste, and abuse in government?
Oh, with government, as with every aspect of government, you can always spend your money more wisely, but not to make up $54 billion over the next decade. And so everything else is on the margin. So you know what the opponents or the proponents of Prop 6 talk about? Well, we can take the rainy day fund. We supported the creation of a rainy day fund because when the inevitable downturn comes, we don't want them raising taxes to fund general fund programs. And the public voted to have a rainy day fund to substitute for general fund revenues so you don't have to raise taxes when that inevitable downturn occurs, so we can fund our schools, our health care, the things that the general fund takes care of today.
And that's interesting you mentioned that, because the rainy day fund, the money set aside, is about $16 billion. There's been studies that show that even a mild recession would cost about $40 billion. And so even though $16 billion seems like a lot to set aside, even in a moderate recession, it's not going to anywhere near cover the amount of the cost that's going to be incurred by the government.
Well, people will want that there. When the downturn, hopefully it won't be a recession, but a downturn is going to cost
what
the
goes
state.
up must come down.
And do we want to maintain our schools, or do we want to raise taxes on everybody to fund our schools? And if you have that rainy day, if you divert that rainy day fund, first of all, it's a drop in a bucket compared to our transportation needs. But you'll use all that up. You'll have to raise taxes to fund your schools, like we've done in the past. And you won't have enough money for your infrastructure.
Well, there's your answer as to why you're opposing Prop 6. Thank you very much for that part of the conversation. Up next, the politics of Prop 6. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. Perhaps no proposition on November ballot has generated more interest than Prop 6, the effort to repeal SB 1, the 12-cent gas tax, among other things. Our guests are Laurel Rosenhall with CALmatters and Jon Myers with the LA Times. So, Jon, although generally characterized as a repeal of the state's new fuel taxes and vehicle fees, there's an important aspect of this proposition that may be being overlooked, and that is it would require voter approval of any future fuel and vehicle-related taxes and fees. What are the implications of that?
Well, the implications simply are that the legislature won't be able to take action in the way it has in the past, and certainly won't be able to do what it did in increasing gas taxes in 2017, which is what this is all about. It really, to me, Mark, it's the sweetener of this, right? I mean, it's the thing, voters love to vote in the state on ballot measures. And any idea
particularly on budget matters.
Right, well, budgets, taxes, things like that. Anytime you tell them you're going to get to have a say at that is what I think was designed to try to kind of boost that turnout. The polling hasn't shown it so far. I think they're struggling to get their message out, but I think clearly that was aimed at trying to get a yes vote that much more so.
So that ballot box budgeting issue again, Laurel. So what do you think? Pretty important implications if that thing passes?
Yeah, and I think that cities and local governments are terrified about this idea, and part of the problem is that this gas tax, known as SB1, was really focused on maintaining the roads, really unglamorous kinds of projects, filling potholes, doing kind of some basic maintenance.
It's a basic government function.
Correct, but if you are now tasked with going to the voters to ask for money, then usually you're going to want to peddle something shiny and new. And how are you going to sell voters on the idea of, we've just got to pave the roads?
Well, let me ask you this. A lot of people seem to acknowledge that this proposition, Prop 6, is really about energizing the Republican base, getting them out to vote, and particularly in those contested congressional races in California. Will it be enough to overcome the Trump factor in California?
That was the goal. I'm not sure it's going to pan out, honestly. The recent polling doesn't look encouraging. In competitive districts, only a little over a third of likely voters said they plan to vote yes on this. Now, there's still another month to go, but the yes campaign doesn't have a huge amount of money, and I'm not sure in the end that'll be a huge game changer.
I think one of the most fascinating things out of this to me is that it's somewhat counterintuitive what you have to do as a voter here, because if you don't like the gas tax, you have to vote yes.
Right.
If you like the gas tax, you have to vote no. And that's not the normal messaging you get in a campaign. It's like, no gas tax, but yes,
Vote yes.
on Prop 6. So I think that is struggling there too. And honestly, they just don't have the money. I mean, all of the construction industry, the building industry, organized labor, the governor's backers, business groups are all in it for the gas tax to exist as it does. The backers of the repeal have not had money after those congressional candidates put the money in. It's a really tough race.
I think there's a fracture there in the Republican Party between the business interests who want SB1 to stay in place and the anti-tax groups that want to get rid of it. I mean, isn't that creative?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and the business groups have backed a lot of Republican politics in the past. You wonder if there's an after effect to all
Well,
this.
I think this is part of kind of a bigger evolution we're seeing with business groups in California. You know, they're no longer wedded to the Republican Party. You know, they have put a lot of money into fostering a cohort of moderate Democrats in the state legislature, and they have seen that the way to kind of get their policies across is to convince Democrats. So I see this whole dynamic as kind of part of that bigger evolution
Well,
for
let's
business.
flip it. What about the Democratic Party? You've got a situation there where typically they don't like regressive taxes like a sales tax. Why haven't we heard more opposition from progressives and Democrats saying, we don't want the gas tax either?
I mean, some people are saying that. It's not that no one's saying it, but generally you have just an enormous broad range of constituencies that want this thing, including, construction unions and many of the trades, that this is going to be a ton of jobs.
I think that's right, and I think also too, the backlog is real. There have been years and years
Anybody
and years.
who drives knows that.
Yeah, the backlog is real. And there really is no other way to do it. There simply hasn't been. The opposition to the gas tax has said, well, you could use money from this pot or redirect this. But those are really complicated, very hard to do. I think the Democrats in the Capitol knew this was really the only thing to do. And even if they didn't love it, regressive tax is a really good point. They held their nose and went for it. And so we're going to see in November where the voters are.
Let me ask you this. Governor Brown's sitting on $15 million in campaign war chest. We don't know if he's going to run again for something, but let's assume he's not. Is he going to use some of that money to help?
Not a chance.
Really?
Not a chance. I don't think so. No, it's a bold prediction, right? I'll see if I'm wrong by the time voters see this show. I don't think he does, because I think that's his seed money to play in politics after he leaves in the end of the year. I don't think Jerry Brown's going away. I think Jerry Brown wants to remain a force. I would also point out to people that on the 2020 ballot, we think we're going to see another fight over his parole changes, which he really cared about in 2016, Prop 57. He could want to come back and campaign to that. They have plenty of money to try to protect the gas tax in this campaign. I don't think Jerry Brown's
You're going to make it
exist.
unanimous?
I was going to give a softer no. I was going to say basically.
I went out there.
I was going to basically say only if he has to. I mean, if kind of like the polls start changing a lot, or someone comes in with a huge amount of money for the other side and circumstances really change, maybe he throws in a couple $1 million. But right now, there's no reason he would.
I want to thank our guests, Laurel Rosenhall with CALmatters, John Myers of the LA Times, Paul Golaszewski from the California Legislative Analyst's Office, Jon Coupal from the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and Allan Zaremberg from the California Chamber of Commerce. Make your voices heard. Vote. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.